For joining us today for our three crucial skills of superior leaders web seminar with New York Times bestselling author Joseph Grenny. My name is Paul, and I'll be the event moderator today. Just by way of housekeeping, I'd just like to let everybody know that we are recording today's web seminar, and we will send out a link to the recording following the event. So in the chance that you have to leave early, or maybe you'd like to share this with a colleague, we'll definitely be providing you with that information. We're also, for those of you that are on Twitter, we've set up a hashtag if you want to use #leadership as your Twitter hashtag and kind of discuss some of the thoughts that Joseph will share today. You're welcome to do so as well, and send those out to your followers. Also, to start off with, if you don't mind, on your GoToWebSeminar console, I would love for you to type in there in the chat area some of the areas where you're calling in from. Joseph always likes to see kind of where people call in from. We usually get a pretty diverse audience from all around the world. So while you're doing that, let me go ahead and introduce our presenter today. I'm excited to have Joseph Grenny join us. For those of you who haven't had the opportunity to hear Joseph speak, he's a world-renowned speaker and author and one of the foremost thought leaders on leadership and influence today. He was asked to speak at the World Business Forum conference last October, which is a highly prestigious event with many of the world's thought leaders on a number of different topics. And he is now a four-time New York Times bestselling author as of the release of our new book, Change Anything, just came out in the last few months. So we're excited to have Joseph speak with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Joseph and invite him to take it away.
Great. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, everybody, for taking this time with us. I still haven't gotten used to the thrill of having a medium like this where I can sit here in a comfortable office location looking out at the pristine peaks of the Wasatch Front in the United States, and all of us can have a conversation from all over the world. So if you'll sit tight for a moment, I've got some ideas I'd like to share that I think might have important relevance for you as leaders. I'm going to give you a chance to play along, so get close to a keyboard if you can, and there will be a few times throughout where you'll have a chance to interact and give things a try. But first, I want to let you know I'm going to name names today. So we're not going to just talk in generalities. I want to talk very specifically. I want you to understand what I mean by a superior leader. So if you ask folks about leadership, you'll get wide ranges of answers, kinds of skills and attributes that great leaders have. And probably there's legitimacy to the fact that there might be 100 different skills that you could argue are important to leadership. But what we're going to talk about today are an essential few. We're going to talk about what we call the crucial skills. My colleagues and I have been researching for 25 years together what makes a profound difference in the effectiveness both of an individual leader but also of leadership in an organizational context. And that's what I'm going to share with you. What does it all come down to? What are the differentiating factors? And one of the names I'm going to name is Joe Horton, who you see in front of you right now. This is one of the rare people who embodies all of the skills that I'm going to describe today. He's become a dear friend. He was a legendary CEO of a pediatric hospital for about 20 years. Those of you from healthcare on the line probably know this person's name. He was the CEO of Primary Children's Hospital, one of the finest pediatric care organizations in the world. And has more recently been the Chief Operating Officer for Intermountain Healthcare, also an organization with a stellar reputation. One of the things that's unique about Joe is how he handles just a handful of crucial moments. He caught my attention when the two of us were at lunch one day getting acquainted, and he described how early in his career he was in a meeting with 26 fellow CEOs from his hospital system. These are people sometimes with large urban hospitals, tertiary care centers, some in rural organizations. He, of course, representing Primary Children's, a pediatric hospital. All of them were in debates about policy issues, and one came up that had particular relevance for him. I want you to sympathize for just a moment with what Joe was facing. He was noticing he had incredibly high turnover in what's called the PICU, the Pediatric Infant Care Unit, intensive care unit in his hospital. Now think for a moment about what those words mean. Pediatric intensive care unit. So you have small babies frequently who are in the most intense struggle of their short lives and require the most acute care you could possibly give in his entire hospital. The skill sets required of nurses and doctors in that setting are at a premium. Any mistake could cost the life of one of these little infants. Well, he was noticing he had high turnover in this area, which is incredibly disruptive to saving the lives and caring for these little children. And this was unacceptable. Well, one of the barriers he faced as a leader was that they had a pay policy that required that the PICU nurses be paid on a similar scale to nurses across the rest of the organization. You can understand from an HR perspective why you'd want to do this, because otherwise you get jealousy and comparison and turnover and things like that from other places. Joe knew that this policy could not stand. This policy had to change, but he had 26 other CEOs aligned against his need to be able to create differential pay for the PICU nurses. That was the moment. That was the issue. And here he is in a meeting trying to decide, how do I deal with this? Most of us would feel powerless and overwhelmed. Most of us would be incapable of dealing with this. Well, I was struck in talking with Joe, not just that he was able to find a way through that Gordian knot. Not only was he able to get the policy changed so that turnover dropped and lives were saved in his PICU, but he did it in a way that not only maintained but even increased his sense of mutual respect and mutual purpose with all these 26 other colleagues. It wasn't combat, it wasn't debate, it wasn't political, it wasn't leverage. And I was just gasping with admiration at his capacity to sort that through. So this is an example of the kind of unique leader that we've learned from over the years. And as I share with you these points today, I want you to understand that they come from those sorts of practical experiences, but also broader research and looking at the effects of these sorts of skills. So here are 3 points that I want to make in the few minutes we have today. The first I want you to get may sound like 101, but it usually doesn't show up in practice in our efforts as leaders. It's that behavior matters. Second, that some behaviors matter much more than others. And finally, that leadership is about influence, period. That's what it's about. That's what it comes down to. Those 3 points will support the conclusion I'll come to at the end, which is the 3 skills that I would advocate that everyone on this call ought to be mastering. So let me begin with a little illustration. You could think about the challenge of producing results as a leader as an iceberg. There are 2 different ways of going after that iceberg of results. One are situations, one are strategies that we call above the waterline efforts. These are attempts to improve results by changing strategy. Now, strategy can sound like a big word, but as we all know, those of us on the call who are directors or middle managers, there may even be some supervisors, frontline supervisors on our call today, you set strategy at every level of the organization. You determine what are the priorities, how are we going to use scarce resources, how will we deploy what we've got to maximum effect. So strategy applies up and down the chain. Structure. You could change the design of your team, the design of a department, the design of an organization. You could change products. You could change processes. Now, my argument today is going to be that these are what we call above the waterline leadership efforts. You change strategy, structure, product, or process, and you can, through those concrete and visible means, improve results in an organization. But what I'm going to argue is those are the smallest part of leadership. In fact, the fundamentals of leadership are below the waterline. Let me make the point this way. I would argue that frequently what goes wrong can't be fixed by just manipulating strategy, structure, product, or process. In fact, let me go backwards for just a moment. I recall an organization I worked with years ago, a pharmaceutical company. The FDA, Federal Drug Administration, came in and shut down a number of their factories because they were not producing good quality materials. Now, that's a problem when what you're creating is a drug. As they dug into it, they said, is it a strategy problem? Is it a structure problem? Is it a process problem? And typically, that's how we try to go after things. Should we change our process? Should we issue a new policy? What they found was that the problem was deeper than that. They had only 53% compliance on quality checks. They had the process, they had the structure, they had the product. What they didn't have was compliance. Now, what frequently goes wrong is not strategy, structure, product, or process. It's behavior. Well, I sat down a number of weeks ago and made a list for myself as an individual of all the behavioral challenges I faced at the time. And I share these to show the broad range of things that sometimes befuddle us as leaders, but also as individuals, because the solutions I'm going to suggest today really address this full range of concerns. So I just made a list, and I'd encourage you to think about yours right now. Now, what are all of the behavioral challenges that you face and are struggling with right now this morning? So this was a Thursday morning, as it is where I'm sitting today, and this was my list. My list included these fine people. So as you see in front of you, these are some of my colleagues. So Michael and Mindy and Mike and Andy and Brittany all standing in front of you, just great folks, tremendous professionals, skilled contributors, but I had a challenge with them, a behavioral challenge. It was that we were about to launch a new product. We're in the process of launching a new product. And my challenge is that these people are incredibly competent and incredibly focused on helping to sell and promote the products that we already had out. We had 3 very fine ones out in the channels, but getting attention for the new one was an enormous problem. It was a behavioral problem. Second was this. Now, this might not look like a behavioral challenge, but this was acquired not long before I made my list by my neighbor, my next-door neighbor. And while it's a fine-looking beast, and I'm sure it promised years and years of fun for him and his family, I didn't like where he parked it. He parked it right on the property line between his house and mine. So every time I backed out of my garage, I got to look at this. So the second thing on my behavior challenge list that morning was, how do I get him to park it somewhere else? The third was this fine group of people. These are my partners from the past 25 years. So Carrie, Al, Ron, and David, I'm seated there in the center. These are some of the most brilliant people I've ever met, tremendous friends, respected colleagues. And yet I had a responsibility to help us finish a book. And every week I'd talk with the publisher, and the publisher would say, where are the chapters? And I had to turn to my colleagues and say, where are your contributions to these chapters? I had a peer problem. My problem was getting everyone to finish things on time and on spec, and sometimes they didn't, and I'm not going to name names on this one. Here was the third. The night before I made this list, I'd gotten a phone call. Now, standing in front of you here are 4 fine young men. The one on the right is my son, Hiram. The other 3 are his buddies. Now, Hiram called me at 10 o'clock at night, as I'd expected him to do, and I had expected a phone call to come directly from him asking for a ride home as he was finished playing with his friends. But instead, it was from the police, who said, we have your young son in custody. We found that he was throwing water balloons at cars in the dark with his friends, and we would prefer that he never do this again. Could you please influence him? So I went and picked up Hiram, and we had a little influence opportunity. But this was on the top of my mind this Thursday morning. Here was the last. This is my neighbor, Jim, who the week before had had his 3rd heart attack. He'd had a first heart attack, changed his ways, a second heart attack, changed his ways, and then a 3rd heart attack, and the doctor said, you aren't going to get a 4th. Enough damage was done to your heart that if you don't permanently change your ways, you're going to die. And my neighbor, Jim, sat down with me and said, can you help? So these are all the behavioral challenges that I had. These weren't problems of structure, process, strategy, or product. These were problems of individual human behavior. Now, the argument I'm going to make is that you and I often get confused as leaders because we miss the simplicity of what leadership means. There are fundamentally only 2 things that leaders do, 2 problems that leaders need to solve. The first is a strategy problem. That's a problem of saying, what should we do? It's setting direction. Whether you're in a team, a department, a division, an organization, one of the ultimate requirements you have is helping to determine priorities. But beyond that, after having made that decision, the real work begins. And the real work is answering the second question, which is, how do I get everyone to do it? Now, the problem is that as leaders, you and I tend to focus very much on number 1, the visible stuff, the tip of the iceberg stuff, the things where we can make decisions or set direction or articulate priorities. But we tend not to think very clearly about the second, if at all. So I want to give you a question. We're going to take a little poll here, and I'd like to ask you to think about two different roles that you have in your current assignment. The first is your individual contributor role. I'm specifically choosing those words because I want to jar you out of the muddled thinking we often suffer. I'm going to call individual contributor tasks that you can do pretty much on your own. Or you may get a little input from others, but largely these are decisions you need to make. You're creating a budget. You're driving for decisions, doing some analysis, answering emails. So what percentage of your day is spent in tasks that you largely do by yourself, that you do on your own? Now, the real question I want to ask you is what percentage of your time do you spend in true leadership? And I'm going to define leadership as systematic and intentional efforts to influence the behavior of others in order to achieve results. So when you're doing leadership tasks, you're rarely producing results yourself. What you're doing is trying to influence others so they improve their capacity to produce results. So what percentage of your day is spent in intentional, systematic efforts to help others improve the results they achieve by influencing their behavior? Go ahead and answer that on the poll line. Paul will let us know how to do that.
All right, we'll let a critical mass build here. By the way, while that's building, Joseph, just to let you know, when we asked the question at the start of the hour as to where people were dialing in from, we have all 50 states covered. We have folks from as far away as India and Bermuda, and so this is truly a global call, which is exciting.
Well, terrific. Welcome to everybody.
All right, we've got a critical mass here. Let's go ahead and close the poll and show the results here. This is related to the percent of time that people spend in systematic and intentional efforts to influence the behavior of others. All right, let's share those results. So it looks like about 20% say less than 10% of their time, 39% 10 to 25, 25%, 20 to 50%, and more than 50% of their time, 16. So sort of an even distribution there.
Great. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for that feedback. Now, I'll tell you that while it's useful for us to get feedback from us kind of off the top of our heads, we've done time analysis. So I've worked with probably 20 CEOs over the years and done actual time tracking to determine the percentage of time they literally did spend in systematic and intentional efforts to influence behavior. The result has been almost always less than 10% of the time. When you start doing really careful analysis, it turns out that it's almost a small fraction of our time that we spend doing real leadership work. Which leads me to an important point. I call this Grenny's Law of Leadership. Grenny's Law of Leadership is that you really ought to flip the emphasis. Why? Because we tend to focus so much on the top of the iceberg when the bottom is the real challenge. There is no strategy, no product, no process so brilliant that people in your organization can't find a way to screw it up. The real challenge of leadership is not the setting strategy. It's not identifying the right products. Now, those are important tasks. But if we don't get the behavior problem right, then number one, we're not really true leaders, but number two, we don't really produce results. The mass of the problem is under the iceberg. So for example, we may spend time trying to say, let's improve our brand. Let's create a good, strong brand. If we're in security services, we'll create a good, strong image, alert security force, right? And that'll position us well in the marketplace. But if the behavior of our employees doesn't match the message of the brand, we ultimately fail. You could say you want to compete with the best products in the world in high-end culinary services, for example, but if the behavior of your employees doesn't match the quality of the product you're trying to produce, you got a problem. You could try to provide the most high-end technology, the best processes, the best patient care strategies on the planet, but if the behavior of your people doesn't match the intention of the process, you ultimately fail. So over the years, we've studied leaders that really understand the base of the iceberg, that really have understood what leadership is. One of them I found a few months back is this guy. His name's Danny Meyer. remarkable guy, and I want you to think about him in terms of that iceberg. If you were giving somebody advice on how to be a successful entrepreneur, which 25 years ago Danny Meyer wanted to be, what would your best advice be? Frequently it's find the best market space, right? Find a place to compete where you could have a blue ocean, right? Where nobody else is going to contest your dominance in that space, and then you can really thrive. We tend to think strategy is the answer, or having the right products or services. Well, I want you to listen for just a moment to the story of Danny Meyer. So Danny Meyer wanted to be an entrepreneur, so what does he decide to do? He decides to go into the restaurant business in New York City. Talk about a horrible market space. This is the most bloody ocean you could pick on the planet. He opens the Union Square Cafe in kind of South Midtown of Manhattan. But what was remarkable about him, in spite of the fact that he had 20,000 competitors in the 5 boroughs of New York City, I mean, he's not the first guy to think of starting a restaurant there. In spite of all of that competition, within just a matter of months, his restaurant is the #1 Zagat-rated restaurant in all of New York City. It's staggering. It isn't as though he had different ingredients. It isn't as though he had kinds of menu items that nobody else has ever conceived of. What was he doing? Now, after the success of the Union Square Cafe, you would have advised him to extend the brand, right? So open a Union Square Cafe in Uptown or Downtown, or open it in one of the boroughs. You want to extend the brand, wouldn't you? Well, he doesn't. He throws away the entire concept and starts a high-end French restaurant, 11 Madison Park. And within a matter of months, it's #2 on the Zagat ratings. Why? Because Union Square Cafe is #1. Well, after the success of 11 Madison Park, he opens an Indian restaurant, and then he opens an informal Italian restaurant called Maialino. And after Tabla and Maialino become successful, he opens the Shake Shack. There's absolutely no logical, strategic sense to anything this guy is doing. And yet every single one of these restaurants, including ones he's opened during the financial meltdown of the past few years, has been phenomenally successful. All of them are in the top 20 of Zagat ratings in New York City. How do you do this? Well, I want you to listen to Danny for just a moment in his own words. And I want you to listen to what he doesn't say as well as what he does. What's the key to Danny Meyer's success? Here you go.
When you think about the number of guest experiences that happen in our business, I counted up recently, and on an average day, we are, believe it or not, serving over 100,000 meals in one day. That's a lot of opportunity to do great things. It's not a lot of opportunity to make some mistakes along the way. But if you look at that many human transactions and you say, what if I could actually impact just 5% of those experiences by doing something so thoughtful for that person, not contrived, but something that that person would really like. It could be dropping them a note after their meal. It could be learning a little bit about them and asking them about their latest book or their latest speaking engagement, depending on who that person is. If 5,000 people of those 100,000 people left with a magical experience over and beyond how great the food and wine was, which is our job, just think about how that could fulfill our growth opportunities for the future. And that's one of the vital behaviors that we ask not just of our managers, but we empower all of our line employees to do as well.
Okay, so you heard Danny Meyer. I had asked him the question in this interview, what's the key to success here? How do you do this in one of the bloodiest strategic competitions on the planet, a restaurant in New York City? And what didn't he say? Well, I want you to sort of parse those words out. If you look at what he's talking about, he didn't mention strategy. He didn't mention structure. He didn't mention product. He didn't even mention process. What he mentioned was what's at the bottom of the iceberg. He said, it's the behavior of our staff that differentiates us. That's the thing we have to learn how to manage. And the problem is most leaders, number one, pay little attention to that, but number two, don't even have tools and skills for doing it, even if they did. So we spend 10, 20, 25% of our time on that kind of a problem when it's really the bulk of what we have to do to try to produce sustainable and differentiating results. So point number one is behavior matters. It's the essence of leadership. Point number two is that some behaviors matter much more than others. You want to be an effective leader, there are a couple of behaviors you need most to foster. And finally, we'll talk about how you end up changing those kinds of behaviors in a successful way. Well, let me ask you in the chat line for just a moment to answer the vital behavior question yourself. If you as a leader were to try to foster one behavior above all others in your organization, what would it be? If you could get everybody to do one thing consistently that you believe would help you achieve stellar results, what might it be? Type it in on the chat line. And Paul, if you'd help me out with what we get as a response.
You bet. Here they come. All right, we'll let a few of them build up. I'm seeing a lot of collaboration, a lot of accountability, both self and of others, respect, communication, ownership of self and ownership of position, a lot of respect, a lot of honesty and truthfulness, a lot of communication and teamwork. I'm trying to find maybe some others that we haven't talked about. Let's see here. Compassion, kindness.
Great.
Those are interesting
Great.
ones.
Let's go
Positive
with those.
attitude. Okay.
Good. Good. So quite a range. A couple of themes in there with honesty, accountability, respect. Now what I want to do is suggest that there are a couple of behaviors underneath all of those. There are a couple of behaviors, we call them vital behaviors, which as a leader you have to foster in order to get every one of the rest of those to happen. These are why we call them part of the crucial skills of leadership. Now to take you to those, I want to share with you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to have you play with one of them. Here's the first. There was a lunch meeting that took place a few years ago that dramatically changed your life and mine. Now, we may not even be aware of it. The guy in the picture here was one of the lunchees. His name is Angelo Mozillo. I wonder if anybody knows who he is. Angelo Mozillo was having lunch in Southern California with a guy by the name of Daniel Mudd. And the two of them were chatting over this lunch about kind of everything in the news. And finally, the lunch conversation got a little intensive. Angelo Mozillo leaned across the table, pointed in the finger of Daniel Mudd, and made a statement. Now, I need to tell you who these characters are. Angelo Mozillo was the CEO at the time of an organization called Countrywide Mortgage. Daniel Mudd was the CEO at the time of an organization called Fannie Mae. Now, perhaps you understand why this was a consequential conversation. So as this lunch goes on, Angelo Mozillo says to Daniel Mudd, if you don't get more invested and more engaged in these subprime loans, you and your organization will become irrelevant. So this was a key point in this conversation, in this moment. And following that moment, Daniel Mudd went off and made policy decisions that had enormous consequences, not just for Fannie Mae and for Countrywide, but also for the rest of the world. That one moment, that one conversation had enormous impact on so many things that you and I cared about. Now, I'm not arguing that the entire financial meltdown and the tremendously destructive policies that came out of those organizations were entirely the consequence of that conversation, but that conversation had a disproportionate effect. Now, here's the next illustration I want to play with, and then I'm going to generalize something from it. I want you to play the role of the woman on your left in the scene here. You're going to hear an audio of a conversation between her and the physician on your right. So we're going to call her Bonnie. The physician on your right we're going to call Scott. So Nurse Bonnie and Dr. Scott are going to be chatting. Now your job is going to be to, as soon as the tape stops, as soon as the audio stops, finish the conversation for Bonnie. I want you to type in your chat line the next thing you would say if you were her in this conversation with Dr. Scott. Here you go.
Can I get you to check in on Mr. Gonzalez before you take off? He's the older gentleman who had the punctured lung. We're hoping to release him.
I can't. I got to get to my son's music assembly. Just, I don't know, just tell him something came up, and I'll come back tonight and check on it.
Actually, his family's all here expecting to take him home. I told him you were just down the hall. Please, it'll only take a minute.
You told him what?
I assumed it would be okay. I thought you'd be right in.
Oh, you thought? And where did you learn to think? Certainly not some two-year rinky-dink nursing school, that's for sure.
All right, there it is. Now type on your chat line your next statement if you're Bonnie. Where did you learn to think? Certainly not some two-year rinky-dink nursing school. What do you say next?
I'll try to scan these for the PG-rated audience that we have today. Okay. A common thing I'm seeing is, excuse me, you're a jerk. Some people are actually apologizing, but I'm getting a lot of back off jerk. Let's see what else we can find in here. Here's a couple of good ones. State the facts that I didn't learn from a bad nursing school. Restate the facts. Try decaf.
Good. Let me pause this there for just a second. These are great. I wanted you to take a shot at that sentence because this helps tee up for us what we found to be two of the most important skills, the two of the most important behaviors you have to foster in an organization if you're a leader. And here they are. They come down to moments when these three conditions come together, moments where someone's dealing with a high-stakes issue. So Daniel Mudd sitting across the table from Angela Mazzillo, or Nurse Bonnie standing there at the desk with Dr. Scott, high-stakes moments where people have opposing opinions and strong emotions. What we found is that how people behave in those moments has a more profound effect on whether you as a leader get all of the behaviors you listed in the chat line 2 questions ago or not. Whether or not there's respect in a department, whether or not there's clear communication, whether or not people are held accountable, whether or not people are engaged. All of those hang on these moments. So when we talk about the point that some behaviors matter more than others, your job as a leader is to foster the couple of behaviors that disproportionately determine whether or not you get every other healthy behavior you want. And here they are. Those 2 behaviors are whether or not people get to dialogue about high-stakes disagreements. So think about Angela Mazzillo and Daniel Mudd. Can Daniel Mudd take a position? Can he assert a point, even when it's not politically correct or popular? So go back to the man I described at the beginning, Joe Horton, sitting in the room with 26 peer CEOs. And the dominant view is that if we change this HR policy and differentiate nursing pay, the entire house of cards comes down. Could you have the skills for somebody like a Joe Horton to speak up in that context and make a point to disagree in a way that works? And secondly, do you have an organization where everyone holds everyone accountable, irrespective of their level or position? Can somebody speak up the chain of command? Will they hold peers accountable? Those moments determine whether or not you have a culture of respect and decency and open communication and trust and engagement and accountability. Those we found through our research are the things you have to go after as leaders. So let me just share a couple of tips with you on those points. So we've studied, as many of you are probably aware, the concept of crucial conversations for about 20 years. And we found that there are repeatable strategies that you and I use in those moments to succeed. One of the ones I'd like to highlight is how we handle just the first few minutes of a crucial conversation. In fact, just about the first 60 seconds. We call this the hazardous half minute. Why? Because you and I tend to behave exactly wrong in those moments. If you look at the chat line and how many of us go off on Dr. Scott, you'll find how we characteristically mess this up. Here's an example from about 200 years ago. A doctor who was advocating the need for hand hygiene in hospitals in order to save lives had a contemporary from a German hospital system who had disagreed with him, who said this is a waste of time and hand washing makes no difference, there's no such things as germs, and this was, of course, before the wide acceptance of germ theory. So Ignaz Semmelweis, the doctor who is the exponent of hand hygiene, answered his rebuttal. He answered his opposition. And fortunately for the public record, we have how he began this crucial conversation. Here it is. He says, "You, Herr Professor, have been a partner in this massacre. Should you continue to teach your pupils against hand hygiene, I declare before God and the world that you are a murderer, and the history of childbed fever would not be unjust to you if it memorialized you as a medical Nero." Affectionately, Ignaz Semmelweis. I added the affectionately part. want you to sort of capture the spirit of that. Isn't that how we feel? When somebody takes a strong position about something we believe is wrong, or somebody behaves in the way that Dr. Scott did, how do we tend to deal with those moments? Most of us want to say what we say here on the screen, and because we know that won't work, we say nothing. In most of our organizations, over 90% of the time, your people and you yourself probably just suck it up. We say nothing. And what are the consequences of that? Well, I want to give you a case here for a moment. I want you to now go back to your chat line. I want to set you into a crucial conversation, and then I'm going to teach you one principle that we've learned by watching the superior leaders like Joe Horton and others deal with these moments. So watch this little exchange. Your job is going to be Jackie, the woman on the left. You're a direct report of Scott on the right. You're going to be talking to him about a concern you've got. As soon as this stops, I want you to say the next thing you would say if you were Jackie. Here you go.
Wait a second. You give me this restaurant gift certificate, and you say it's a reward for my good work, and that I should take my husband with me.
Well, you deserved it.
Then I find out it's for Friday night, the night of my daughter's birthday party. And it's not really for my husband and me. We have to take a client who, by the way, drinks like a fish, and we don't drink, to a steakhouse, and we don't eat meat. And worst of all, you set this whole thing up behind my back. Is that about right?
Well, yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Come on. These guys really like you, and they're really big buyers.
I'm sorry, Scott. You'll have to get someone else to do it.
Hey, didn't I fight for you on your last promotion? Didn't I go out on a limb to tell everyone you were a team player? Was I mistaken?
All right, go. Chat it back. Was he mistaken? He said you were a team player. So how would you respond to that moment?
All right, we'll let a few come in here. I am a team player. That's not fair. Let's see here. Restate the facts. It's not going on a limb for you to tell the truth about me. I am a team player.
Great.
Seems
Let me pause on those
of
for just a second, Paul.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. Now, that's the natural, normal response. But if in this moment with the boss, I tend to move to the topic of, yes, I am a team player and defending myself on that ground, have I dealt with the right issue? I mean, am I on the wrong topic? But most of us, when we're thoughtful about it, would recognize that whether or not I'm a team player has nothing to do with what's going on in this conversation right now. It's a distraction. And in fact, blowing off at my boss and telling him what a jerk he is for doing this probably isn't going to work particularly well either. Now, here's the point. We've watched people in these moments. We've watched superior leaders like Joe Horton in that moment with 26 peer CEOs who are holding a strong line against what he needs to be able to save children's lives. And what we found is you can disagree. You can tell the boss that he's behaving inappropriately. You can tell Dr. Scott that he has no right to act the way he did. You can do that. And they will not be defensive if you know how to handle that first few minutes of the crucial conversation. How do you do this? I want you to watch this. So I'm going to just lead you into the guts of the research. You're going to hear now as Jackie responds skillfully. Now, what you're going to hear is not made up. This isn't just from actors. This is scripted from an actual conversation I watched where a woman held her boss accountable in precisely this way. If you were the researcher trying to explain why this worked, what would you write down? Think about that as you listen. Here you go.
Didn't I go out on a limb and tell everyone you were a team player? Was I mistaken?
I can see we're in a tough spot here. If you want someone to take out a couple of important clients, and you've already promised them a night on the town. Is that...
My mistake. Sorry, let me get us back there. You're going to get a replay of the first few seconds. Here you go.
Didn't I go out on a limb and tell everyone you were a team player? Was I mistaken?
I can see we're in a tough spot here. You want someone to take out a couple of important clients, and you've already promised them a night on the town. Is that about right?
That's exactly right.
Well, I don't want to disappoint a client any more than you do, Scott. But just as important, I want a relationship where you're upfront with me, rather than making arrangements first and then talking to me about it afterwards.
Okay, but please don't bail, because I've already got the whole thing set up.
You know, that's a big part of the problem here. You schedule the dinner with the client, present it to me as a reward, then hint that if I don't do what you want, I'm not a team player. That doesn't feel right. To be honest, it feels manipulative. Did it happen that way, or did I miss something?
Well, yeah, but I knew if I asked you before, you'd say no. And these guys are really important.
All right, let's tackle these things one at a time. First, I'd like for us to find a way to work together honestly, without games. I'd like both of us to be comfortable about how we establish plans.
I don't know what to say.
Well, I'm curious. Why did you feel like you had to set up the dinner with the client first, then present it as a reward?
So how'd she do? I mean, was that a good way of handling that moment? And what would happen in your team and in your organization if everybody knew how to do what she did? Here it is. The first strategy for addressing a crucial conversation is to create what we call safety. There are two things she accomplished. She created a sense of mutual purpose and also communicated respect in those first few seconds. And that's what people have to learn to do. What we know is that when you create that kind of condition, you can talk with almost anyone about almost anything. And your job as a leader is to help foster that kind of behavior. It's also to have that capacity yourself. If leadership is about influence, then one of your most fundamental challenges is when you're sitting in the room like Joe Horton, to be able to speak up and candidly disagree, hold others accountable in a way that does not provoke resistance, that does not communicate disrespect. Creating safety in those first few minutes is one of the foundational skills for doing that. Now, I want to move to the last point. The last of the three skills that people need to have in order to be a Joe Horton, to be a superior leader, is the capacity to create rapid, profound, and sustainable behavior change across a team, across a division, across an entire organization. And most of us have no way of even thinking about that fundamental leadership task. So I want to give you a leadership problem to solve here. Let's say you had to change the behavior of a whole bunch of airline passengers. How would you do it? So your crack team of researchers just came and told you, as an executive of All Nippon Airways, that if all of the passengers on your planes would use the restroom before they boarded the plane, you could lighten the load of the plane by 240 pounds, which would reduce your carbon footprint and your costs. And now they've turned to you as a master influencer and said, come up with a way of doing that. So how would you do it? Type in on the chat line, how would you get all the passengers to use the bathroom before they boarded the plane? Fire away.
All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, we've got a lot of what we would call source 5, Joseph. So offer a reward, offer free snacks.
Free snacks.
All the way up to reducing the price of a ticket, which I don't know how you'd enforce. Make a restroom right, some structural things, make a restroom right before the boarding area.
Interesting.
We've got a lot of just simply ask them.
Yeah, great. Well, let's pause on that. Now, what I want you to notice is that we all have a default theory of influence. So if the first few that came through were all incentives, most often that's what you and I want to do. If I want to change the behavior of my sales team, I better change their incentives. If I've got another department that isn't cooperating, I need to change the goals they're going to be evaluated against. You and I tend to think that there are single sources of influence that are the powerful ones that drive behavior. And it's that thinking that undermines our effectiveness as a leader. So many of us can identify with David Sedaris' statement, I haven't got the slightest idea how to change people, but I keep a long list of prospective candidates in case I should ever figure it out. So we see leadership failures in how rarely we can create behavior change across an organization, how rarely we can change our own behavior, how rarely we can address social problems that require us to change behavior, or even global problems. Fundamental challenges in society and in our organizations and in our personal lives are typically behavioral challenges. And most of us have no way of even thinking about these fundamental problems. So we're talking now not just about how do you talk somebody into changing, but how would you create systemic change? How would you get a group of people, an organization of people to change their behavior? The most important capacity you possess as a leader is your capacity to influence behavior. But when we have problems like the one I teed up, which is kind of unique and quirky in nature, you and I rarely have systematic ways of thinking about it. We pitch out an idea or two, but we don't know how to take that kind of problem apart. So we've spent years trying to find what scholars know about this, examining articles and books, and then identifying influencers like Danny Meyer and Joe Horton and studying what they've done to create rapid, profound, and sustainable behavior change. People like Don Berwick, who was able to mobilize an enormous amount of behavior to support and improve patient safety across the healthcare system in the United States. Dr. Wiwat Rojanapathayakor, who in a number of countries, beginning with Thailand, was able to influence profound behavior change, reducing the number of new AIDS cases by up to 90%. How do you do this? We found this woman who's influenced the behavior of thousands and thousands of lifetime drug addicts and criminals, has a 91% success rate in helping them change their lives forever. And we found that there are identifiable, recognizable, replicable strategies they use for changing behavior that also work in an organizational context. They've enabled Dane Hancock to drive profound behavior change in a matter of months across a very resistant, very staid, very formal organization in order to improve the likelihood of their winning an enormous program, which they ultimately won. These same strategies were used by Matt Van Vranken and some of his colleagues at Spectrum Health in West Michigan, a wonderful healthcare system, in order to improve patient safety by improving hand hygiene. And look at how long it took to see remarkable change. Compliance on hand hygiene went up an enormous amount in literally weeks across a 10,000-person health system. Why? Because Matt, because Dane, because Joe, because Don, because all of these people know how to think about the second problem of leadership. They know how to think about the influence problem, and most of us don't. Most of us think our job is to empty our inbox. It's to try to hold a meeting or facilitate a solution. We don't know how to think explicitly about the kinds of behaviors we need to foster and then robust strategies for fostering them. In our work on influence, we found there are 6 unique sources of influence that you and I have to master. I'm going to just teach you one of them as a way of illustrating how important it is to learn this. So here's your influence problem. I'm not going to ask you to chat your answer in on this, but I want you to imagine for a moment you have a direct report and that your job is as a supervisor of Danny Meyer's Shake Shack. So you run the Shake Shack, and your job is to get all of your employees to try to create stellar experiences for your customers all the time. And one of them, by the name of Cletus, isn't doing it. In fact, in spite of the fact that you've been telling him over and over again to spruce up the dining area and greet and meet customers and care for them, he stands around and consumes food and texts his girlfriend or buddies rather than doing that. So this just happened. It's a 10 in the morning slowdown, and in spite of repeated reminders, you've just seen him snacking and texting rather than greeting and serving. You walk up to him and you say, what? How are you going to address this? Well, the common audience response when we put this question to him is, grab a broom or get out of here. We use authority. Or it's to use guilt, Hey, you need to pull your weight around here. Everybody else does and you aren't. Or it's implied authority. It's Cletus, this is the last time I'll remind you of this, and I'm writing you up. Now, those might be appropriate responses at times, but we've studied influencers. We've studied people who are really good at creating a culture like Danny Meyer does of individuals who create exceptional experiences for their customers, for example, in a retail or a fine dining setting. And we found that one of the ways they differ from you and I is how they deal with perceived motivation problems. So it's true. Sometimes the behaviors we're asking people to do are boring or frightening or disgusting or uncomfortable or painful. How do you address that? How do you help somebody feel motivated? One of the sources of influence that we address in our influence work is how you tap into the intrinsic pleasure or pain of the behavior itself. How do you mobilize change in spite of the fact that getting somebody to go clean tables just isn't fun. Or getting somebody, instead of stuffing their face with fries, to walk over to somebody and care for them and greet them, which is kind of an uncomfortable thing to do. How do you get somebody to do that? Well, one of the mistakes you and I make as influencers is just how we think about Cletus. We tend to think that the reason he's not motivated is because of some moral defect. The reason somebody's not washing their hands in my hospital is because of a moral defect. The reason Scott is talking to Nurse Bonnie the way he is because of a moral defect. Influencers almost never draw that conclusion. They assume the problem is moral slumber. The problem isn't that they don't care about good things and decent things. The problem is that in the moment, they aren't thinking about good and decent things. All I need to do is awaken them. One of the remarkable things about human beings is that all of us are Cletus. All of us are Dr. Scott. All of us are the doctor who's not washing his or her hands. We spend most of our lives morally disengaged, unconscious of the moral and human implications of our choices. So what do influencers do? They recognize that you can help people transform how they feel about almost any behavior. And how do you do that? You connect it with human consequences. Well, one of the ways that you and I try to do this is through verbal persuasion. We use words and threats. We use guilt and other things that we might do with Cletus. What influencers tend to do is create direct or vicarious experiences. I want you to listen to how this happens at Danny Meyer's organization. You're going to listen to his VP of Organizational Development. You're going to hear her describe how Danny Meyer tends to tap into motivations in his organization. Have a listen.
A young woman came into the restaurant for dinner with her parents, and it became clear to the server that this young lady probably had just graduated from college. She might be on her first job outside of school, and she had brought her parents to New York to see her new life and how she was growing in her own, in her own career. And at dessert time, they were looking at the dessert menus. And she saw on the wine list for the dessert wines that there was a bottle of Chateau Yquem, which is a very expensive dessert wine. It was being offered at something like $75 a glass. And she said to her parents, someday, when I am more established in my career, I'm going to bring you back here. And we are going to get Chateau Yquem to celebrate. And her server overheard her. And when their desserts came out, he brought out 3 dessert wine glasses and poured a single pour of the wine into the 3 glasses. So he split the pour. So it was a $75 comp that he did. And 2 tables away, Danny Meyer was sitting with his family having dinner. And Danny saw the whole thing evolve. And after that happened, he told the story over and over again. When I tell that story, I get choked up because I think about the emotion of those parents and that young woman and what that meant to them. And so thinking about how important that is to the guests and the impact that that comp has, what Danny is saying is if you can create that kind of an experience for people, it's worth it. That's what we want you to do.
Did you catch what happened? So Danny Meyer's sitting there, he watches this happen, and then what does he do? Does he go correct the person and say, you gave away $75? No. He realizes this is leadership brilliance, that this is an opportunity for me to help spread the culture of this organization far and wide. By doing what? By telling the story, by creating vicarious experiences. So let me tell you what happens with Cletus at Danny Meyer's organization. I watched this happen at the Shake Shack. An employee who's clearly not doing what he needs to. A supervisor walks over, puts his arm around this person, and says, hey, you know, a few minutes ago I saw a mother walk in here with her 2-year-old daughter. She set her daughter up on a chair and then walked over to order her food. As her daughter was on the chair, she started brushing her hand back and forth across the table that was smeared with ketchup from a previous guest, and her daughter began licking it. I watched this employee recoil in horror, run and grab a rag and go start wiping down tables. What did that supervisor do? Rather than relying on guilt or authority or threats or extrinsic motivation, this supervisor connected that employee with the human reasons for doing what he was asking her to do. When people behave badly, it's more often from moral slumber than moral defect. We can use the power of direct experiences, the power of stories, to help connect people with reasons to be personally motivated. Now, that's just one of the sources of influence we've got to learn to use in a different way. What I'm trying to illustrate is the need for us to think as influencers, to learn to be able to tap into multiple sources of influence in order to drive profound change across an organization. Because when we tap into multiple sources, it tends to work far, far better, as we published in some of our research in the MIT Sloan Journal. So what are the 3 skills of superior leaders? Number 1, like Joe Horton, they know how to disagree agreeably. They're skilled at those crucial moments. They know how to hold anyone accountable regardless of their level or position. Those moments like Nurse Bonnie and Dr. Scott. They know how to influence rapid, profound, and sustainable behavior change, like Danny Meyer, by tapping into multiple sources of influence. And that's what you need to learn to do as well. When we do, we're able to create that kind of stellar culture. We're able to address the problems below the waterline, and we don't stay stuck on just the individual contributor tasks that are easy for us to get done in setting strategy, product, process, or priorities. So that's what we wanted to share with you today. How do we become better leaders? We master these 3 skill sets, and then we diffuse them across an organization. What would happen in your organization if everybody knew how to disagree agreeably, hold others accountable regardless of their level or position, and diffuse behavior change rapidly, profoundly, and sustainably as some of these influencers do? Well, we hope today's conversation contributes to your capacity to do that. You see in front of you now some options for you to continue to learn about how to operationalize some of these skills and diffuse them across your organization, and we hope that you're able to more successfully do that in part because of our conversation today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Joseph. We appreciate it. And as Joseph mentioned, there on the screen, you're welcome to visit vitalsmarts.com. You can get a number of complimentary resources on each of these areas of focus. You can take a deeper dive. If members of your team weren't able to watch today's web seminar, we have deeper dives on each of the areas and crucial conversations and influencer. And what we'll do at the conclusion of this web seminar, we will send an email out to everybody who registered containing a link to the recording, and we will also provide a number of resources. The study that Joseph mentioned a few slides ago, the MIT Sloan Management Study on how to 10x your influence. It was actually named the Change Management Article of the Year in 2009. We'll include that as well. So particularly for those of you that may not be familiar with all of our content. We are at the top of the hour and out of time. What I would suggest, if you have a specific question that you'd like to tee up to Joseph, if you would email that to me in the email confirmation you got for today's web seminar with the dial-in information, there was a contact email address of pyocum@VitalSmarts. That's me, Paul Yoakum. If you wouldn't mind sending me a question, I'll be happy to pass those on to Joseph, and we'll try to get as many of those answered as possible. If you have any other questions about the recording or when you might receive that, you're welcome to answer that or respond to that email as well. Or if you have positive feedback or any constructive feedback about today's presentation, we'd also love to hear that. So be more than happy to pass that feedback on to Joseph. Again, great job, Joseph. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. We had the max amount of people we could have on the phone call. So for those that couldn't get in, we apologize, but we had over 1,000 people join us today. So great topic, and again, thank you for your time, and we look forward to talking to you all hopefully again soon. Best of luck with your leadership challenges and developing these skills that Joseph talked about today. Thanks, everybody. We'll say goodbye for now.